And welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Going for Two, presented by Homefield Apparel. I am your host, the publisher of the Extra Points newsletter, Matt Brown. I'm joined here, as always, by my colleague and co-host, Bryan Fischer. How you holding up, buddy?
I'm doing good. I know everybody, this is not a football month, but I think the kind of early part of March, maybe one of my favorite times on the calendar. You got obviously March Madness, you got basketball tournaments out the wazoo, you got midday basketball, as we talked about last time. We got Champions League in soccer. The NBA is kind of coming down to the crunch time for things. We just came off the combine in the NFL free agency already about to kick off, and some wild trades in the NFL. This is a pretty jam-packed sports calendar right now, and I'm loving it. Just kind of following along.
I think it gets a little bit more fun like 2 weeks from now, but the beginning definitely is definitely great. And also, this is the time of year when spring allegedly starts. It's when you start getting into some more 40-degree days. We've had like 2 different false springs in Chicago over the last week and a half. Was a couple of days ago, I went to the playground in gym shorts and like a hoodie. You get the vitamin D coming back. I don't have to have the happy light kind of behind my studio here blasting for 6 hours a day, so I don't walk in front of a truck. Like this is pretty good. This is pretty good. While there's still a gajillion administrative things happening, obviously the major storyline within the college athletics universe would be the NCAA tournaments for both men's and women's basketball. I correct me if I'm wrong here. I've noticed that the branding for the women's tournaments has already changed. Now it's just unified March Madness. You don't have the women's signage in front of all the logos anymore, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a change that was precipitated by the gender equity report that came out. One of the big recommendations that I think everybody understood was something that had to be done, really to kind of bring that parity between the two. And, look, you follow along with this and you talk with folks and you understand there has been a real effort, on account of the NCAA and everything that goes into that apparatus in terms of, making sure things are equitable. It's even going down to the gift baskets. They're comparing them side by side this year. There's really been some really close coordination between the two men's and women's basketball committees, even beyond just kind of the branding element and using March Madness and all that. Those committees have met more, I think, in the past 2 months than they did previously in years, at a time. It might be 1 or 2 joint meetings a year or a semester, and now you're talking about more regular meetings. So I think the closer cooperation has led to some productivity in terms of the branding, the awareness, of the women's side of the basketball. And let's face it, I mean, if you ended up seeing that thrilling end to the SEC tournament where Kentucky upset South Carolina, women's basketball, I think everybody's going to be tuning in a little bit more this year because it's some pretty interesting things happening there at the top of the sport as well as what's happening as we kind of transition into tournament time here.
Yeah, we've actually been trying to track down some women's basketball experts to talk through ahead of the tournament. We've missed a couple people with travel schedules and everything. We hope to do that and give that event the room to grow on this podcast in and of itself. But you're right. I mean, I saw this earlier today. The Big Ten Network put out a statement saying, listen, this was overwhelmingly our most watched women's basketball season. I mean, having Caitlin Clark helps that, that's a national name. You have a tournament where UConn has looked mortal, but they might still be amazing because they haven't totally been healthy. You have a extremely good NC State team, which you haven't had in a minute. A couple of the other powerhouses are still strong. That is going to be a very interesting event. And then now we have many of the mid and low major men's tournaments wrapping up, more continuing on this weekend into next week. And then we'll end up with our tournament. And I don't enjoy the major conference tournaments for the men's side as much, I think, as other people do. And I think part of that is because I grew up in Big Ten country, and the Big Ten tournament's usually the last one to finish. Like they announce the bracket 4 hours, 3 hours after the game. And when you're watching it, everyone kind of knows that the game doesn't really matter. Like it might move you 1 seed line, probably not. Unless Northwestern's playing and they're going to steal a bid, and that's kind of the dirty little secret with a couple of the major tournaments, despite what they might say in the mock drafts. But in the low majors and the mid majors, it's extremely important because you're only going to get one team, and you're going to hear a lot over the next 2 weeks about why it's important financially to win that bid, why it's important for your university. Their institutional goals, for their marketing plan, for their enrollment, if they get that bid, particularly if they actually win. And I want to go ahead and telegraph my punch a little bit. I'm going to be writing about this for Extra Points probably several times once the men's tournament actually begins, because I think there's a lot of maybe, I don't want to say lazy journalism. I don't think that's the right word, but there are a couple of tropes that people fall into that maybe don't necessarily stand up to actually looking at the numbers a little bit. One of those is the Flutie effect. You know what the Flutie effect is, right, Brian?
Absolutely. I think maybe the most popular thing that people outside of college athletics could probably recognize and tell you about just a little bit, I think just in terms of they may not even know who Doug Flutie is anymore. I think that's the funny thing, but obviously popularized by the, back in Boston College, upsetting Miami those days and seeing the uptick in applications thanks to sports success. But, I think everybody nowadays does realize, and you hear it all the time, that university athletics is now the front porch for your school. And I think that's kind of directly comes from all the talk about the Flutie effect.
Yeah, and unlike I think many other intersections of college sports and the university administrations, this is one of those things that not only has been written about a lot in like popular sports press, but there's also been some actual academic research into it over multiple years. So you're right. Like the TLDR, the Flutie effect, is this idea that if a university has has unprecedented, unexpected success athletically. Typically in football and men's basketball, there's a little bit of this for women's basketball. That immediately thereafter, they will see an explosion in applications, in the academic quality of those applications, in fundraising and alumni engagement, and many of those other variables. And this gets brought up a lot when you talk to schools thinking about maybe reclassifying to Division One, or athletic directors or university presidents talking about why they have a Division One athletic department to begin with. And I will say, despite my built-in skepticism of some of this stuff, like there is evidence to suggest it is real in the short term. When Butler makes the NCAA championship game, their applications did go up. This happened at Gonzaga over multiple years. It definitely happened at Loyola, just up the road here from where I am in Chicago, the first couple of years that happened. And it's funny. I remember I want to say a junior at Ohio State when American University made the tournament for the first time. And I spent my freshman year at American U, and I grew up in Licking County, Pataskala, Granville, Newark, Ohio. And nobody had ever heard of American U where I grew up. And it was one of the reasons I ended up actually transferring back to Columbus, back to Ohio State, because I figured, why am I spending all this money for this expensive private school that nobody in where I've heard of, I grew up has ever heard of? If I grew up in like Hagerstown or Bethesda or Arlington, I think a lot of people would have heard of American, but that wasn't my world. But when they made the tournament my junior year and lost to Villanova, I want to say, and it was like a 2-point game at halftime. Suddenly, people that I in my world were coming up to me talking about American and where I had gone to school, and these were things like, oh, this is what people at big schools have their whole life. And I understand why that would be attractive and appealing. And that's going to be a cool moment, I think, for anybody in your life who went to Longwood or went to Ooey Pooey or went to, is that how they're calling it still? Or is it IUPUI? Or
I've always heard IUPUI, but
okay, IUPUI.
I heard the Ooey sounds better. A derogatory version of that, but yeah.
Well, I wouldn't want to besmirch any IUPUI fans, but right, if you're one of those schools that makes a tournament once every 30 years, 25 years, 20 years, being involved here is a big deal, even if you can't necessarily quantify that. You and I, we went to big sports powerhouses. That's not maybe something we could necessarily always relate to, but we know people who went to other schools who get to have a moment like this, and that's kind of cool, right?
Well, I mean, just on our Connect platform, I was talking about the Valpo AD job. For those that are not familiar, Valparaiso, right, not too far from where you're at.
Not too far. Yeah, that's almost Chicago.
I mean, when you hear Valpo and you hear it, around this time of year in March, you hear about the shot. And I was talking with somebody just how the Drew family, obviously all three, they had three coaches that have come through there, obviously the historic shop during the NCAA tournament, but like just how much of that kind of hovers over the university as really being connected and synonymous almost with that name, not just this time of year, but, if you ask somebody randomly on the streets, about Valpo, if they're going to pick out one thing, it's probably going to be that shot, and that incredible moment during March Madness. And to me, that is a great blessing. It can also be a curse for some others, but it does kind of speak to the fact that you can have one moment here in March, and it can really kind of rebrand your university. And I think that's kind of associated with the Flutie Effect. Certainly, just the awareness I think that March Madness provides for a lot of these schools. I mean, we are coming down to decision time for a lot of high school students out there, and certainly you're already seeing acceptance numbers. You're seeing admissions numbers. I saw the other day that UCLA put out again that they were the most applied to and one of the most selective schools in the country. So it's getting that time of the year, and you add this sporting element to it, and I think it just makes it definitely fascinating whether you're a high school student trying to figure out where to go, and maybe you're not quite sure in terms of what academic programs you want to get onto. Having a good basketball team, having a good football team, just bringing that awareness to your university can be a big thing.
I don't think there's anything that Florida Gulf Coast University as an institution can do in our entire lifetimes that will be more impactful for anybody outside of that immediate zip code than Florida Dunk Coast. They could create astronauts. They could graduate the next Jeff Bezos. They could host any number of gubernatorial and national political debates. But if you ask somebody who was old enough to remember this 15 seed dunking Georgetown into oblivion and then laughing about it, that's what it's going to be forever. And so these are positive things. We could probably think of maybe some more challenging ones as you kind of dig through there. This is true. The math is also a little bit not a little bit. That's also clear. This isn't sustainable. You don't get the glow of the Florida Dunk Coast brand forever, especially if a couple years later you've changed coaches, you're bad. Then people remember that you're Florida Dunk Coast, and they're like, oh wait, you finished sixth in the ASUN, or you don't get that same boost. And if you don't, if your performance does not grow or exceed previous expectations, then you won't either. Gonzaga is not going to get a boost for making the round of 32. That's the baseline. You're supposed to make the Final Four now. Like, you're not the plucky underdog anymore. Now you're chartering flights and you're signing the number one recruit in the country. So what you have to do grows a little bit here. So you can't really count on that as being any kind of sustainable strategy for your university. If it happens, it's a beautiful little accident, and you cherish it, and you print the T-shirts, and you savor the memes, but you can't control what happens. We might go another 50 years without Florida Gulf Coast winning another NCAA tournament game, right? And that's not to crap on them. It's just winning a game of the NCAA tournament is really hard. There are Power 5 programs that haven't done it. I don't think Nebraska's done it yet, right? Like, they might have only made the tournament like twice. Northwestern's only done it once ever. Like, it's not easy to do.
I was at the Northwestern game, as a matter of fact, back when they did that. It's funny too, because there's such a pressure for these universities to get students. I mean, it's competitive right now. I think that's kind of the underlying thing that, people maybe overlook a little bit, is that if you're the university president, whether it's big state, university institution or whatever, you're facing a lot of enrollment pressures. And this is a differentiator. It's almost kind of marketing for the university that does, have the ability for you to kind of separate yourself from some of your peers, certainly regionally and locally, but also nationally, especially if you're some of those small private schools that, you do want to be competitive for students both in state and out of state. Athletics is a way to do that. And I think it's also, keep in mind, we talk about the Flutie Effect when it comes to enrollment for students, but I think there's a small effect. It probably hasn't been studied all that often because nobody will truthfully say it. But you mentioned Loyola Chicago there. I think in terms of conference realignment, I think that has been their March success. Has been a big part of their story. I think
unquestionably. Yeah.
If you have that success and you keep building over time, and you show that you are not just one program, not just one coach, you are kind of bigger than that, and you do have that historical success, and you do have that marketability, that is attractive for other leagues. So it's not just in terms of raw student numbers and applications and all that. It really is a university-wide impact, from your athletic department all the way to your admissions office.
Yeah. That's why George Mason is not in the Colonial Athletic anymore. It's because they had multiple deep runs into March. Now, again, how you can sustain that across multiple coaching changes and having to increase your athletic department spending and all these other things, that's difficult. Loyola might be the best case example, and we'll see what happens, because this is a pretty senior laden team when they start playing in a more challenging league, and you have to recruit a little bit differently. But for now, and they're going to be dancing again. It's a cool story.
Yeah, I mentioned talking about Valpo earlier. I mean, they used to be in the Summit League, or what was now the Summit League, went to the Horizon. Now they're in the MVC. So it's like they've been a success story, kind of riding not only the coattails of that one historic moment, but they've built on that success. They've had success over the years. With some of the other Drew brothers coaching it, but they've been able to kind of parlay that into some bigger things, and now as a result, they're having to compete in a much tougher league, and they are finding some struggles. They're going to have to figure that out. That's something the new AD is going to be at the top of their wish list in terms of priorities, is fixing basketball and making sure they can get back to the level they're accustomed to. But it's all kind of part of this runway, as everybody kind of aims their sights pretty high. You got to make sure you're focused on what's going on now, but also these type of runs in March can have a huge effect down the road.
Beyond just your ability to potentially recruit new students and get marketing exposure, and maybe reevaluate, change the trajectory of where your school might go conference-wise. There's also, on the men's basketball side, the way things are set up right now, a literal bag of money that comes from this. You may have, if you're a college basketball fan, you're probably familiar with the concept of tournament units. And Bryan, correct me if I am explaining this incorrectly, but broadly speaking, your conference gets a check for every team from your league that makes the NCAA tournament, and for every game that they win. So the Big Ten, it's going to get 8-9 teams in the tournament. They're going to get a bigger check than the Big South. That might get one. But if you're at a low major league and your one team makes a run, wins a couple of games, you get extra units. And some leagues distribute that money equally. Some leagues give that money disproportionately to the team that earned it. It depends, but that could mean hundreds of thousands of dollars more in revenue over a multiple year period, because units are paid out over 6 years. So making the Sweet 16 as a Missouri Valley team or a West Coast Conference team or some other kind of mid-major isn't just about long-term administrative wide benefits, but like literally this could pay for your Olympic sports budget, over the next 2 years if you do well, or someone else in your league does well, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's important to keep in mind the unit, when you hear that explained, that's that could be $300,000 plus to $400,000. That's the actual unit, but it is paid over 6 years. So you have a great tournament run as a conference. Like you look at last year in the Pac-12, the incredible run that they had with UCLA and Oregon State and USC going all far. That they collected 19 units last year. That's almost $40 million to the conference. Spread out over a period. And you think, all right, well that's great. They're a Power 5 school. When you're talking about kind of cutting the revenue gaps between them and say the ACC or the Big Ten,
that matters.
That's a huge thing. I mean, that's nearly, almost twice as much as the ACC ended up taking in. So, that's a huge, if you're talking about shrinking revenue gaps, you look at certainly the Big East, some of the basketball centric conferences, it's a huge portion of what their conference distributions are, just coming into those units coming in and having success in the NCAA tournament. And when you're talking about the lower end Division I, campuses and universities, you're talking about, those are some big, outlays, in terms of if you can get a surprise win or two, and you can make it to the second weekend, you're talking about 6 figures distributed to multiple campuses, and that can help so much when you're talking about facilities renovations, installing a new basketball court,
or schedules, right? I mean, $65,000 means, hey, that's one less body bag game you have to play. That's one less trip to UCLA if you're a school in Virginia to get the crap kicked out of you because you need to collect the check. You do well here, or potentially one of your conference peers does well here. And depending how things are distributed, that could mean a much easier life for you 2 or 3 years down the road. 60 grand goes a long way at that level.
Yeah, I mean, think about like your track team or something, and just your expenses are related to that. This is a way you can kind of help pay for it. If your track team needs some resurfacing or another assistant coach, maybe those tournament revenue units that you were maybe not counting on in your budget end up coming through. I mean, that's certainly a way that a lot of these smaller schools can end up paying for things that they maybe weren't expecting.
So I think it's important to point out though, that this is the status quo, and there's not any reason to believe that this is necessarily going to continue uninterrupted forever. There's a couple reasons for this. One, going back to that gender equity report from last year with the men's and women's tournaments, one point that was repeatedly raised is, why does the men's tournament get a payout and the women's tournament doesn't, or literally any other tournament? Even though the women's tournament generates revenue and is going to continue to generate more revenue, and it may even be sold as a standalone broadcast product moving forward once the current deals expire, that should be equitable. Schools make hiring decisions and conference alignment decisions and structural decisions based in part on their ability to maximize these payouts. We've had conference leaders from the Patriot League to the WCC to other folks say, like, this system is not equitable or fair. And that is something that could be revisited in the Transformation Committee. I have seen proposals to decrease the amount of money for the men's tournament share and create a women's tournament share. I've also seen proposals to get rid of shares, period, to allow things to be equitable and transmit or share that money as some kind of general block. The other issue that I have heard explained to me, and I think this has been the case for you too, Bryan, is looking into the NCAA Transformation Committee. When we hear Power 5 schools or big schools talk about wanting more autonomy, they're usually talking about wanting more money. And a big part of that comes from the men's, particularly the men's basketball tournament, but other tournaments too. If they think, if you're a major school, if you're a Pac-12 school or an ACC school or an SEC school, and you think, why are we, it's one thing to invite everybody to the tournament and then give all of the Big Souths and the WACs and the MEACs some of that tournament money. But the Sweet 16, the Elite Eight, the teams with the extra NBA players, they're almost always coming from us. We're the ones that actually make the entire engine go. Why should we guarantee revenue shares for teams that are never going to crack a 15 seed line and are going to lose 94 out of 100 games? Why shouldn't more of that money go towards us? And whether that conversation changes because and it means the automatic bid structure is revisited, or the size of the tournament is revisited, or what a unit is revisited, I think there's a real chance in 3 or 4 years that this current surprisingly egalitarian system for sharing revenue from this big tournament, I don't think it's going to look the exact same way that it does, because there's a lot of people who had their hands out right now asking for more of that money.
Yeah, I'd almost say there's 0% chance that the current structure is going to stay in place, just based on the talks that I've had, based from not only the D1 Transformation Committee, but I think there is some real movement to where, especially on the women's side, to either have that financial incentive, to where you if you do better, you can get some more money. I think there's obviously a lot of talk about those rights and what they mean, and when a new TV contract, when a new marketing contract ultimately gets sold separately, what that influx of cash and how it's going to be distributed. I think there's been a lot of talk around, kind of mirroring what the men do right now, but I think it's all kind of part of these holistic changes that the Transformation Committee is looking in. One that I think a lot of folks are definitely interested in terms of just like, what is this going to mean for me in like 6 or 7 years? And I think, it's important to keep in mind, look, the NCAA, this is the primary maybe distribution driver from that big March Madness contract and everything that they have. There are other units that are not units, but they are other kind of like buckets they can distribute money out of, other funds that they have. There's things like officiating that they dole out money for to conferences and various schools. Certainly the student athlete fund as well is another way that they can kind of funnel some money down through the system, if you will. But I think everybody is focused primarily on what is that March Madness spigot going to look like, in a couple of years' time. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it really does run the gamut in terms of some of the suggestions that we've had. The key thing in my mind is ultimately, who's going to agree to all this? Is it just going to be the Power Five? Or is there going to be that angst and that discussion between them and some of those one AAA conferences that maybe are only basketball centric, that obviously this is their lifeblood? And so I think there's going to be a lot of debate. I think it'll be healthy. I think for everybody involved, just to kind of get it all out in the open at some point in the next couple of months. But you're right. This is going to be a unique time, and one we've talked about when teams are jumping up from D1. Part of that unknown is ultimately what is that revenue split going to be, because Division I itself has been growing, and so that pie is getting a little bit smaller piece by piece, and how that's going to ultimately get redistributed down the road is something that we're going to be talking about a lot, I think, over the next couple months and couple of years.
Yeah, it is a great point. We've already seen now a couple of schools make that big leap of faith. One, without the complete certainty what their league is going to look like in 5 or 6 years. I don't think anybody can tell you that. And then two, how much money they're going to be getting, because they have a general idea about how much they're going to need to be spending, which is more. And you can make an assumption of what your future revenue is going to look like, but we don't know what the transformation community is going to look like yet. Hey, if you're listening and you got some ideas about this, I'm at matt@extrapointsmb.com. My DMs are also open. Happy to talk about it.
Well, and it's not just basketball that we're thinking about this revenue distribution policy. It's football too, right? Like in the college football playoff, they distribute money to the Sun Belt, even if they don't end up making, the actual, Final Four. The Sun Belt's getting part of that money. Conference USA is getting some of that money. Army, Notre Dame, they're getting payouts as well, and it's less like the NCAA tournament system, but that's likely to change as well. Not only in terms of the percentage of those payouts, the amounts of those payouts. That's another thing that a lot of people are probably keeping an even closer eye on because of the amounts involved. But that was a big holdup for the Pac-12. They've made no bones about it that they were trying to sign up for something that they didn't understand what the revenue sharing was going to be in 2026 and beyond. I think that issue is going to pop up again and again as well on the football side, not just on the basketball side. So you got two really, really big buckets of money that are certainly coming schools' ways, but how it ultimately reaches them, ultimately how is that paid out, how is that distributed, how is that percentage split? Nobody really knows. And there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of talk. And I think that is keeping a lot of folks up at night because, you're talking about your budget, not just 3 or 4 years from now, but the next 10, 15, 20 years, having that uncertainty, that's something that nobody really wants. You can live with some uncertainty on the court and the kind of changing nature of college sports. But when it comes to that money aspect, that is a whole different ballgame.
Speaking of uncertain future revenue distributions, I want to tell you about one of our sponsors here today, Envelopes of Cash. Bryan, are you a big board game guy?
Used to be, but I got two little kids, so I'm sure we'll get right back into that when they're of age.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some Candyland and Chutes and Ladders, I think, in your near-term future.
Oh yes,
that's definitely part of my life, but I own Settlers of Catan. I have Ticket to Ride. I have a lot of my in-laws and other people in my social circle are really into this stuff. I feel like this is getting really into complicated board games is like secretly part of Mormon culture. I think. I don't know if it's like you can't drink and you have people over. So I don't know. Let's go play some Belgian board game that takes a long time. I like those things, and I like college football. And I like the weird stuff about college football, which is why I'm excited about Envelopes of Cash, because that is the intersection of a Euro style resource trading game, the kind of game that's going to get you really spitting angry at somebody across the table, which makes for a fun experience, and the weirdness of a rival's message board. Or tracking the intricacies here of college football recruiting. It comes from a longtime reader and friend of the podcast, friend of the newsletter, Andy Schwartz. You might remember him from being one of the economists that worked on the O'Bannon and the Alston case. He's a huge board game junkie too. So he created this resource trading game, which you can play online, which we're going to be doing with Extra Points readers in the near future. You can also get a physical board game where you sit around trying to play as a college football coach, trying to recruit the best possible recruiting class using maybe above the board financing, booster bucks, and less above the board financing, which has certainly never happened in the history of college football recruiting before, the Envelopes of Cash. I also want to point out here that the Kickstarter just went live earlier this week, but they still have some room to actually bring people into the game. Like if you look at some of the playing cards of the game, You might notice that some of the illustrations look like college football personalities that we know. There's a Joel Anderson looking card. There's a couple of other ones here. There's some room. So if you want to be able to dunk on somebody by playing the coach with like an athletic director with a Boston accent, and you want to have your picture on that card and thoroughly humiliate the other coach across the table from you, now is your chance. You can go get a copy of Envelopes of Cash, and if you were one of the higher level Kickstarter sponsors, you can actually be in the game. The link to this is going to be in the show notes, but if you listen to this in your car instead of at your desk like a normal person, you go to bit.ly/EOC-EP. So the abbreviation for Envelopes of Cash dash extra points. That's bit.ly/EOC-EP. Grab that and grab your copy of Envelopes of Cash today. I think once the tournaments all happen and I can kind of maybe finish up a couple of these other reporting projects that I'm working on, rather than playing the same 3 video games again, I'm looking forward to getting dumped in a garbage can by some of our Extra Points readers and podcast listeners in this game. We've done board game nights a couple times before. Nicole Arbach, really good at Settlers, for example.
That is something I did not know.
So. There you go. There's a little media gossip. In addition to like breaking every 4th college football story, she's also really good at board games. Also want to point out our other longtime sponsor, deep friend of the program, personal, clothier to the Brown household. I don't think that's a word. Whatever. Homefield Apparel. This week, Bryan, have you seen who they're dropping this week?
I'm gonna give you a big 8 clap. CLA.
That's right. It's your blood enemy, your deepest, most hated rival. I know you're making like the fart face right now. This is actually what I was saving up my money for, not just for the Illinois stuff, but I'm just a sucker for baby blue, man.
Oh, it's so good.
Everything looks good in that color scheme.
Like AD Martin Jarman, like he always has like the kind of coolest like Nike stuff now that they're with Nike, for their general stuff. And I'm just like thinking like how many of the athletic to heart folks at UCLA that I know are just going to be showing up in this home field gear. Like I'm going to make a mental note when I see everybody to see, all right, are you in a home field shirt? Are you in a home field shirt? Because it is the stuff you need to be waiting for. There's a reason this was kind of saved for last. I think that they're going to have a strong closing kick because of that baby blue.
Yeah, I was teasing this for like 5 weeks. I wasn't allowed to tell you, but this is the Pac-12 West Coast basketball school that I really think that you want to get in on. I'm seeing a teaser for a couple of these designs. I'm going to be sending them a check on Saturday when things are officially opened up. If you work somewhere, you're going to wear a bunch of that stuff. But if you're at Wyoming, no disrespect. Well, maybe some disrespect to anybody at Wyoming. Your colors are ugly. It's hard to look good in brown. Take it from me. I grew up in a Browns household. Like we had a bunch of that stuff. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look good if you're pulling green. There's a lot you can do with UCLA. There's going to be a lot of adorable bears. There's going to be rose content. It's going to be great. If UCLA is not your thing, you're in luck. They sell a bunch of stuff that's not UCLA that looks really good, like West Virginia, which is what I'm wearing, and I will probably continue wearing. We've got Utah, another fine school. I will probably be wearing this hoodie or my Marquette hoodie until at least next month when this office is higher than 50 degrees. They've got Illinois, they've got Gonzaga, they've got NC State, which is selling T-shirts of like a horny wolf at an ice cream parlor. It's amazing. Like you want all of these things. You can get it at homefieldapparel.com, and when you do, don't pay full price like some kind of dumb idiot. Use our discount code. Use promo code extra points at checkout. If it's your first order, save 15%. Clothe yourself, clothe your family, clothe your loved ones, clothe your most hated rivals, your blood enemies with soft, interesting, unique, collegiately licensed apparel from our friends. Help support our clothing habit. I really am excited about this. I have some, weak family ties to UCLA that I'm going to use as an excuse to go buy T-shirts that I don't need, or maybe another hoodie. Speaking of the Pac-12, there was one other thing that's unrelated to the basketball tournament, but very related to big, gigantic bags of money that I did want to talk to you about. I know there's no baseball happening right now, and there might not actually. Oh no, excuse me. There's no professional baseball. There is college baseball, but there might not be professional baseball for a minute. But there was still some pretty big baseball news, right? We saw Apple News announced, I think, yesterday that they're going to broadcast Major League Baseball games whenever those become a thing that happen in this country again, right?
Yeah. I mean, it is funny that we're in the middle of these labor negotiations. You're hearing all the talk about it coming out of MLB was like, oh, we're going to cancel another week of games, and then on Tuesday, obviously, there's the Apple keynote where they announced a bunch of big products. But like right at the kind of beginning of the show, Tim Cook is out there and was talking about, hey, we're going to have two really the first major sports deal that Apple has signed with MLB. 2 games on Friday nights, exclusive to Apple TV Plus, which is, obviously a little bit different from some of the other experimentations that we've seen with MLB. They've had games on YouTube, that have gone exclusively, but that's obviously a free platform. This is really kind of the first time they've put it behind a true paywall. They have had the experimentation with Facebook. A lot of leagues have. They've kind of been filling out these Silicon Valley companies, but I think it's notable. Look, this is a first for Apple, obviously, and a first for kind of MLB in terms of their changing media rights negotiations. That obviously they have a key regional sports distribution platform. That there's been a lot of changes going on in that space. A direct to consumer product on that front from the Bally Sports RSNs are coming later this year as well. So, certain teams might be able to, instead of paying your cable company, you're able to pay Bally Sports directly and get your MLB games if they ever end up getting played. That could be, later this year. Obviously, you talk about just the uniqueness of Apple getting into the space, because we've been talking about it, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, talking about the FANGs, the Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google kind of getting involved in sports. And we're kind of starting to see it. First, the Amazon deal in the NFL, now Apple with MLB. And I think there's some hope that will carry over to this next cycle in college athletics as the Big Ten, the Pac-12, et cetera, start coming up for negotiation.
That's the exact on-ramp here, right? Because I don't think Netflix is likely to get involved in buying live sports rights in the near future. I know that they had a lot of success with their F1 documentary. They've reached out now to representatives of a company that I'm certainly not going to talk about on the show to help produce golf programming for them. Like, I know they're doing kind of sports bumper content, but I guess that live sports isn't really what we want to be doing. Facebook's kind of on off again, and also isn't the most brand safe platform that maybe it was seen a couple of years ago. ESPN has done a lot of terrible things. ESPN hasn't, contributed to overthrowing a government in Myanmar or anything, right? Like maybe that's not the brand you want to throw your arms around, but there could be some more movement here. And you're exactly right. The Big Ten is the major college sports entity that's going to go to market first. That's happening this year. We should have some kind of deal. I don't expect the Big Ten to do a deal with Apple because they're going to get a lot of interest from Fox, a lot of interest from ESPN, and potentially some other very large, conventional linear players, your CBS, your NBC. But if I'm the Pac-12, who I know, and and listener, you probably know, has talked with Apple TV before, or potentially the Big 12 in its new reconfigured lineup that will need to find a new flagship partner and maybe won't want to work or won't be able to work with ESPN as much anymore. Maybe if this isn't the answer, maybe it's something to help drive up the price for anybody else, or a component to what you're doing before. I mean, we're not likely to see a major conference park the majority of their rights behind an Apple TV paywall, right? Or is that something that could still happen?
It could certainly. I think the Pac-12 would certainly be the most likely to do that. You got to keep in mind that the Pac-12 is in a much different kind of standpoint from where they're at from a rights perspective than any of the other leagues, because they own everything, right? They're basketball media, their entire media company. They own that. They're taking everything to market. Not necessarily the case with some of the other sports from the Big Ten, who obviously has a relationship with Fox. They have they share control of that BTN network, and obviously Fox is a major player. I mean, I haven't talked with anybody that does not expect Fox to kind of come out the big winner in terms of Big Ten negotiations. Now,
big winner for winning the rights. I mean, we'll see how much you feel about writing a gigantic check, but Big Ten football will almost assuredly be on Fox Sports for the foreseeable future, right?
I mean, I was actually unaware technically, like in terms of, you hear the grant of rights, in terms of that being held by somebody, it's actually being held by BTN and that company, kind of holding company. So that was an interesting thing that I learned along the way recently. But you look at everything kind of going on in the media space. Maybe it's where Fox kind of buys everything for the Big Ten, and they sublicense things out to an Apple TV, an Amazon, somebody like that. That's a possibility to where they, Fox can get the whole thing. They've got control over everything. There's one partner that the Big Ten network has to deal with. That would be appealing for them. And then obviously they're getting help paying for it because they're sublicensing their content. That's exactly what's happening now in terms of some of the basketball games that you see on CBS or whatnot. Those are sublicensed games. And the ACC did it forever, where they had things, sublicensed out to Fox Sports or some of the regional channels there in the Carolinas. The old JPP games.
I was about to say, this sounds like Jefferson Pilot's music,
yes,
right? Like
the old JPP games. I think everybody's kind of somewhat familiar with those. I mean, this is kind of a perk of the TV industry going back, years now. Those sub-licensed games. I think that could maybe see somewhat of a return if you end up getting these kind of holistic media deals done with one partner. But it's intriguing because you're starting to see obviously a lot of growth, a lot of talk about content spend from a lot of these companies. I mean, we just came out of the Olympics. NBC has said, it was pretty successful on their end, all things considered, given the time change, given the geopolitical events that, they were able to drive some Peacock subscriptions. We've heard about NBC possibly being interested in the Big Ten. If you're the Big Ten or the Pac-12 even, being able to put, maybe it's your women's soccer games on Peacock. Maybe it's something like that, could be coming down the pipe. So I think what ultimately a lot of these leagues do have to kind of consider, not just the bottom line dollars, but exposure. I think that's the thing that this MLB deal is kind of brought up is, you want a lot of money. Everybody wants the most money, but you also got to consider, especially for college sports, what is my distribution going to be like? What is my availability going to be like? How am I going to be able to get in front of those eyeballs? We've talked about it, online and offline between the two of us. It's just like, if the Big Ten really does leave ESPN, how damaging is that for their brand? Because if you're a sports fan, typically, no offense to our friends at Fox, if you're going to, wanting to watch some sports, probably the first place you're going to go is to that ESPN dial on your cable channel or the ESPN.
It's the worldwide leader for a reason. Like that it's a brand name like Xerox was for copying machines and Kleenex was for tissues. That's just what almost to that level. I think you're right. Maybe the bigger the question I'm kind of grappling with about all this is who really benefits from it completely. The exposure angle versus the straight cash angle is very important. It's part of the reason, as I understood it, that the Pac-12 didn't immediately leap to an arrangement with Apple TV before. Apple TV is behind a paywall. While we're getting better about this as consumer behavior is shifting, grandma might need some help getting to Apple TV, but she probably knows how to turn on her television to find her grandson playing football on ESPN. So that's a thing that coaches and all sports talk about when they recruit. And now that we're in a world where there's like a gajillion friggin' streaming services, and there's some element of consumer fatigue with paying subscriptions, not subscriptions for extra points, of course, subscriptions for other things. Having to buy another thing is anti-consumer and might make it harder for your stuff to be seen. Not that it's that easy to see Pac-12 stuff right now. Anyway.
Well, and just technically too, it's a bit of an issue that conferences have to consider nowadays. It's just streaming in general, and how that is different from sports. I mean, everybody talks about the delays you get for streaming versus cable. That's one thing, especially if you're live betting, which is another avenue. I think a lot of these leagues kind of have to consider with everything going on in that space. But to me, it's just kind of, if you're in the Big Ten country, let's face it, broadband access in rural Nebraska is not quite what it is in the middle of Chicago or other parts of your footprint.
Yeah.
Right?
Or for that matter, Northern California or parts of of Eastern Oregon. Rural America in general does not have great broadband access, but you're right, especially in parts of the Big 12 and the Big 10 footprint.
I mean, if you go over an example over from across the pond in Italy, DAZN, took over Serie A rights. There was a lot of issues that, Italian sports fans were having with, watching their soccer games because they were streaming versus being on cable and having that, dealing with outages and dealing with, certainly having the unreliability of some of the broadband providers. I think that is, something you got to consider, just the bad user experience that you can have sometimes. Yeah, it can be great when everything works. But if your speed is too slow, or you just can't get it on your TV like you normally want to, that's going to be a problem for some fans, and they could turn off a lot of folks. I could drive them to the stadium as well because they don't want to deal with that streaming experience at home. And yeah, I'd rather just go watch it in person. But I think that's going to be a small, select number, because it's something that everybody's dealing with. Even the major companies,
Yeah.
I mean, the Disneys and the Netflixes of the world. This is something they're constantly thinking about. How can we make sure that we have our product be delivered to the end consumer, not only the same across kind of everybody, but in those tricky spots. And I don't think anybody really has a great solution yet. I mean, you look at the Super Bowl, you look at some of these big time streaming events, it still pales in comparison to what a normal basketball game might get on ESPN. I think you're talking about 3 or 4 times the audience size. And
we've talked about that, if not much more than that. Like what I think we said this exact thing on this show before, but you look at the ESPN Plus numbers for even a good mid-major basketball game or some FCS football games, buddy, it's less people that open up a typical Extra Points email. It is 4 figures, sometimes less than that. And that's still attractive on some level for the broadcaster, because you got great consumer data on those people, and you can maybe monetize them in a different way. But brother, if you got 4,000 people watching a broadcast, like you're limited in a lot of things, and that may be the case even for some Pac-12 stuff that you put behind there. I don't know the right answer. I'm not going to sit here at my desk and say like the Pac-12 should definitely do X, Y, or Z. And I've never watched a sporting event on Apple TV. If I can admit to something, I've never actually used Apple TV. I pirated my Ted Lasso episodes. I watched them with Cyrillic subtitles somewhere else because I didn't want to pay for another thing. I'm sure it's lovely. Maybe if more of you guys subscribe to the newsletter, I would have the money to blow on Apple TV. But I'm trying to be judicious right now. I don't know what it's going to look like. I have a general idea what production quality looks like across ESPN Plus for mid and low majors and P5s. I don't know. It will be. I'm very interested in learning more about their corporate goals in this space and what the non-Big Ten leagues are going to do. Because the Big Ten is going to be fine. You're going to be able to find Iowa football. Big Ten is going to make more money than Uruguay on their deal, and it's not going to change anything. But it's going to be great for those schools. I don't know what's going to happen to Wazoo or Oregon State or Utah in the next couple of years, but that's why we have this podcast. That's why I have Extra Points. Yeah,
and the flip side too for some of those schools, especially in the Pac-12, where there's some unique time zone challenges. I think we're all aware of that. But a lot of those schools, they might end up getting a little bit less, but they might have more control over when their games kick off. I mean, that was
also huge. Yeah,
that was a big part of the old ESPN SEC deal, is that now that allows them to kind of set out kickoff times, way further in advance than they normally would, with multiple broadcast partners, multiple broadcast windows, a little bit more control from kind of the conference scheduling perspective, and that's attractive to schools. Yeah, they're getting a big old check, on the front end as well, but giving up, the ability to kind of control when your games kick off. I know that's been a big source of frustration, not just in the Big Ten, but the Pac-12 and the Big 12.
Everywhere.
And I would imagine that's going to be key in a future deals, not just maybe these immediate, 4 to 10-year deals that are coming up, but I think for long term, you could see maybe more of a return to a lot more games kicking off, at noon Eastern in that window, just because there's the bandwidth, right? You have you're limited right now in terms of your TV windows. It used to be you only had games, on NBC once a Saturday. Now you had all the broadcast networks going in. Now you had ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN U, and then FS1, FS2. We've had these additional cable channels, and certainly the conference networks are a big part of it. They've opened up some windows here and there, but it's also pushed a lot of things to prime time, pushed a lot of things late, where teams don't want to do that from a fan experience standpoint. And maybe the return of and taking that off of TV and kind of out of that TV window clutch. I think you might be kind of put more towards where, hey, we can move it to noon, and it's not going to matter because everybody can flip it on their phone.
It's streaming, yeah. It's funny you mention that. I know that clearly not everybody loved the Colonial Athletics deal with Flow Sports. Talk to anybody at James Madison, whether that's their athletic director or any of their fans, they hated it. They probably didn't get as much money as they could have potentially gotten. But when I talked to both the conference office and people at some other schools, this was one of the biggest reasons why they wanted to do it. It wasn't just about maximizing pure money. It was, we can kick off whenever we want. Which even on the East Coast, to squeeze things around, maybe Virginia Tech or whatever BC or Notre Dame's doing, or something else, the Red Sox, that makes some sense. I don't know the complete answer yet, but these are definitely things worth paying attention to. You can find out more information about not just the nuts and bolts of what the NCAA tournaments are going to look like moving forward, but some developments and analysis of the college sports television industry on Collegiate Sports Connect. Bryan, I know you did an interview recently that we're going to talk about in the show notes a little bit with some experts about what's happening with some of these media rights negotiations. I know you and I are working on a couple other things that aren't quite ready for prime time yet. In this world, Collegiate Sports Connect, good place to catch up on some of this other background information. And I'm told you can sign up for free, right?
Completely free. Go ahead and sign up there for an account, so you can not only watch our videos, but we're cranking them out daily. A lot of insights into the industry that maybe you certainly do not get anywhere else. I mean, where else are you going to get breakdowns of AD jobs and stuff like that, but also bigger industry terms, like these Big Ten media rights and where the conference goes, where companies like Fox and ESPN and NBC, CBS, where they are kind of viewing these rights negotiations. We have stuff on that. Obviously, it's tournament time, so we're going to be talking about all that. We also have some football stuff going on. We're not just basketball centric. We've talked with people about spring games, talking with somebody about the kind of the bowl industry. They've got a big meeting coming up to discuss kind of where they're going from here. And so a lot going on, a lot going on in this space. You've talked with NIL experts, which is obviously a hot button topic and an ever changing topic as well that we hopefully are keeping abreast on Collegiate Sports Connect.
That's right. I just finished a video also talking to some experts in building and maintaining excellent student sections. So if you're wondering why the student section attendance at your favorite school sucks, maybe this video, which we'll include in the link to the notes as well, may give you some information. You can, of course, also find all of this stuff with Extra Points, which is a newsletter you're probably already subscribed to, but just in case you're not, that's at extrapointsmb.com. That is our bell cow that publishes 5 days a week, unique reporting, analysis, insights throughout the college sports industry from the Power 5 down to the NAIA. We're excited about what's happening there too. And of course, if you enjoyed this show, and if you're listening to this point in the broadcast, I think you do, tell your friends. Write a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify or anywhere else that people can review podcasts. Tweet about it a couple of times. Maybe throw it on Reddit if you hang out on Reddit, or on 247 if you hang out on 247, or in your church bulletin if that's a thing that you have responsibility for. Anywhere that you can let people know about what we're doing, that helps us find other people, which helps then make Homefield and Envelopes of Cash and other partners more money, which means we can do more podcasts, which means everybody is happy. Which isn't that what we're all trying to be right now? We're just trying to be happy, right? We got a long season ahead of us, a long year. Let's go make some fun stuff. We'll do it together. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll catch up with you on the internet in a couple of days.